Welcome to History with Herodotus, where we embark on a journey through the ages, uncovering the intricacies of human history and the forces that have shaped our world. Today, we find ourselves at the threshold of a pivotal moment in modern history, one that would forever alter the fate of nations and empires, the Berlin Conference. In the late 19th century, as European powers were vying for dominance on the global stage, Africa became the focal point of their imperial ambitions. The continent's vast resources, strategic trade routes, and untapped potential made it a coveted prize, drawing in the likes of Britain, France, Germany, Belgium, and Portugal. To understand the context of the Berlin Conference, we must first delve into the complex web of events and alliances that led up to it. In the mid-19th century, European powers had begun to establish colonies and trade posts along the African coast, with Britain in particular asserting its influence through a network of treaties and alliances with local rulers. However, as the scramble for Africa intensified, other European nations began to challenge British dominance. One key figure who played a significant role in shaping the events leading up to the Berlin Conference was King Leopold II of Belgium. This enigmatic monarch had long been fascinated by the potential of Africa, and he saw an opportunity to establish a vast colony in the heart of the continent. Through his tireless lobbying efforts and strategic maneuvering, Leopold managed to secure support from various European powers for his ambitious project. Meanwhile, in Germany, Chancellor Otto von Bismarck was navigating the complexities of European politics, seeking to consolidate his country's position as a major power. Bismarck recognized that Africa could be a crucial arena for German expansion, and he began to make overtures to other European nations, proposing a conference to discuss the partitioning of the continent. As the 1880s progressed, the pace of European exploration and colonization in Africa accelerated. The British, led by figures such as Cecil Rhodes, were busy establishing a network of colonies and trade routes, while the French, under the leadership of men like Pierre Savagnin de Brazza, were pushing deep into the African interior. In November 1884, the German Chancellor, Otto von Bismarck, invited representatives from 14 European nations to gather in Berlin with the stated aim of regulating the colonization of Africa and preventing conflicts between the competing powers. The conference would be attended by some of the most influential figures of the time, including British Prime Minister Lord Salisbury, French Premier Jules Ferry, and King Leopold's representatives. As the delegates gathered in Berlin on November 15, 1884, the atmosphere was tense with anticipation. The conference would last for 3 months, during which time the representatives of the 14 European nations would engage in intense negotiations, each seeking to secure their country's interests in Africa. One of the primary concerns of the conference was the establishment of free trade in the Congo Basin, a region that had become a focal point of competition between European powers. King Leopold's representatives pushed for recognition of his claim to the region, while the British and French delegates argued for open access to the area. On November 22, 1884, the conference attendees began discussing the partitioning of Africa, with Bismarck proposing that the continent be divided into spheres of influence. The British delegation, led by Lord Salisbury, was adamant that their country's existing colonies and trade routes be recognized and respected. Meanwhile, the French representatives, led by Jules Ferry, sought to expand their nation's control over West Africa, particularly in the regions surrounding the Niger River. As the negotiations progressed, it became clear that the conference would not only shape the future of Africa, but also have far-reaching implications for European politics. One of the defining moments of the Berlin Conference occurred on December 6, 1884, when the delegates agreed to recognize King Leopold's claim to the Congo Free State, a vast territory that encompassed much of Central Africa. This decision would have devastating consequences for the indigenous populations of the region, who would soon face brutal exploitation and violence at the hands of Leopold's agents. As one delegate noted, the fate of the African peoples was being decided by men who had never set foot in the continent and who knew little of its cultures or traditions. This dark reality would haunt the legacy of the Berlin Conference for generations to come. As the conference entered its final stages, the delegates turned their attention to the matter of boundary disputes between European colonies. On February 26, 1885, the attendees signed the General Act of the Berlin Conference, which established the principle of European control over African territories and provided a framework for resolving border disputes. The act also recognized the right of European powers to exert influence over African affairs, paving the way for the scramble for Africa to continue unabated. With the ink barely dry on the agreement, the delegates departed Berlin, each knowing that their nation's interests in Africa had been forever altered by the events of the past 3 months. As the delegates departed Berlin, they left behind a newly redrawn map of Africa, with European powers poised to exert their influence over the continent. In the years that followed, European powers expanded their colonial empires, often using the agreements reached at Berlin as a justification for their actions. One notable consequence of the Berlin Conference was the establishment of the Congo Free State, which King Leopold's agents would soon turn into a brutal regime of exploitation and violence. As historian Adam Hochschild has noted, the Congo Free State was a system of oppression that was unique in its time, a system that combined the worst features of colonialism, slavery, and modern industrial capitalism. The atrocities committed in the Congo Free State would eventually lead to international outcry and the forced annexation of the territory by the Belgian government in 1908. Meanwhile, other European powers continued to expand their colonies in Africa, often using military force to assert their control. The British, for example, launched a series of campaigns against African kingdoms and empires, including the Zulu Kingdom and the Ashanti Empire. The French, too, expanded their colonial empire, establishing control over much of West Africa and Equatorial Africa. As the years passed, the Berlin Conference came to be seen as a pivotal moment in the history of European colonization in Africa. It marked the beginning of a period of intense competition between European powers as they sought to establish their dominance over the continent. However, it also had a profound impact on the African peoples themselves, who were subjected to forced labor, land expropriation, and other forms of exploitation. Today, the Berlin Conference is remembered as a symbol of the darker aspects of European colonialism. It is seen as a moment when European powers callously partitioned Africa, without regard for the interests or well-being of the African peoples themselves. As Nigerian historian J.D. Fudge has observed, the Berlin Conference was a conference of European powers about Africa without Africans being present. This legacy continues to shape our understanding of the complex and often fraught history of European-African relations. In conclusion, the Berlin Conference marked a turning point in the history of European colonization in Africa, setting in motion a chain of events that would have far-reaching consequences for the continent and its peoples. By examining the legacy of the Berlin Conference, we can gain a deeper appreciation for the ways in which historical events continue to shape our world today. That's all for today's History with Herodotus. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, and until next time, remember that, to understand the present, we must first understand the past.